Okay, we are ready. Paul's here. Hi. Kara's here. Hi. Perry's coming back in. We are recording and we're live on YouTube. Thank you everybody for being here. This is our second Affordable Housing Plan Committee. Francisco's here with Eric to go through our presentation with the agenda, but before we jump into that, let's see, it's 3:03. We definitely have everybody present. Actually, except Bob Botello's not in yet. So there's more than a quorum. And I'm just gonna see if anybody has any comments on the minutes that were attached to the agenda from September 13th. If not, if somebody wants to just make a motion to accept those minutes.
I'll make a motion to accept the minutes.
Second.
Made by PJ, seconded by Paul. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
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 Great, motion
Aye.
carried unanimously. Thank you. Okay, so I have to share my screen with Francisco and we should be good to go. And when Bob chimes in, Bob Botello, I will obviously let him in. And I would just ask you guys, unless you're going to participate, to mute the phones so we don't get any feedback. With that, Francisco.
All right, I will share my screen as soon as I can find the screen.
Hi, everyone. This is Bob Botello coming in by phone.
Okay, that's fine, Bob. Just thank you. Bob Botello's here. Just if you can keep your phone muted,
Yes, okay.
unless you want to say anything so we don't get the feedback. Thank you.
Okay.
Hey, Bob.
Hello, everyone.
Okay,
Hi.
all right. Hello.
Oh.
It's good to see everyone again. Thanks for joining us for our second meeting of the Affordable Housing Plan. And if you weren't here for our last meeting, or if you missed any part of it, we are going to conduct a real brief review of some of the basics of affordable housing plans. So let me go over our agenda. We will very quickly, I know we covered this ground last time, but for those that might have missed it, we will very briefly review the project scope and our schedule. I'll reintroduce you to the 830G requirement and the Affordable Housing Plan requirement. And we will also discuss Public Act 2129, which is actually a little further down on the agenda. We've moved that actually. We'll give you we'll do a land use and zoning overview, and in a moment I'll show you how that's relevant to our work. And then we're going to put you to work in trying to craft the beginning of a vision statement for the plan, which is recommended by the state's guide. And then talk about our next steps in the next meeting. So our project scope, this is the second of 5 meetings that we'll conduct with you. And we have done a good part of our work in conducting data that's relevant to the housing plan. And we reviewed much of that data at our last meeting. So this meeting is not going to be as data driven as the last meeting. And then furthermore, we need to do some community engagement in supporting the plan, and that'll be a little further on down the road. And then finally package that up into a plan document, which we're aiming for later in the spring for that. And so here's how it plays out. Our collaboration with you, we're right there in October in our second meeting. And we've, for the most part, done most of the data collection. There's a little bit more information out there that we need to collect, but we've got most of it in hand. And then we really need to start engaging the community, and one of the means by which we plan on doing that is an online survey that we are still developing, but we plan to review with you at our next meeting. And then the plan development, we're very soon going to start to shift gears from collecting data to beginning to organize the plan, including developing an outline for the plan and figuring out what outstanding needs we have for information for the plan. And then finally, and this is going to be out into March and most likely April, is having the plan ready for adoption. Now, as a reminder, it's Connecticut Statute 830G that really compels us to direct resources to ensuring that the city has at least 10% affordable housing stock. And that is a goal that Danbury actually exceeded, or it currently exceeds, with the 12% affordable housing stock. And as a reminder, the state has a fairly narrow definition of what affordable housing is, and there's a formula for that and which types of units can be eligible for affordable housing. So while the city likely has a lot of housing that is affordable and in much greater extent than 12% of its housing, in terms of the state's definition, it's at 12%.
Francisco, that 12%, that's a 2019 pre-pandemic number, or that's current?
That's a current number. Sharon, do you want to say anything about your inventory and that number that was submitted to the state for this year?
Sure. So the state develops and publishes a list once a year of the units, again, that meet their definition of affordable housing. And they do that in March of every year for the preceding year. So the 2020 list came out in 2021. So that's the current list. The 2021 list will come out in 2022. It's June 3rd. It's July 1st to June 30th of the preceding year. So again, once a year, we report back to them on additional units that we've added to the inventory. They confirm HACD's housing tenant-based vouchers and all the other housing programs. They go through our list and then they publish the list in March. So it is the current list, 2020.
Right.
Thank you.
All right. Now, the way this factors in to how community goes about its business with respect to zoning is that communities that have less than 10%, assuming they're not in a moratorium period, are basically a developer who has a proposal for to develop affordable housing units may bypass a city or town zoning regulations by appealing to the state, and therefore your local community doesn't have a lot of control over that type of development. So that's an extra incentive for communities to do the work within the community to boost their affordable housing numbers in response to need and to the state mandate. As we've mentioned, Danbury's at 12%, and so you're not vulnerable to development applications and appeals through 830G. But I think we successfully, talked about the need that is within the community at our last meeting. We certainly have through our work on the Plan of Conservation and Development, which is ongoing, in that there is affordable housing need in the region and certainly within Danbury that likely exceeds the supply available. And so that's an important consideration here, is not just meeting the state's mandate and protecting against affordable housing appeals, but actually meeting the needs of residents and people in the region. And so these are the types and conditions surrounding the state's defined affordable housing. And we went through this last meeting, but that information is still there if you need it. And as a reminder, we'll post a PDF of this presentation on the city's website, make it available for download if you really want to dig into this definition and better understand it. And of course, the state has some documents online as well that go into a little bit more detail. But essentially, there's a variety of housing types that qualify. Deed restriction is a very common mechanism, and basically limiting either the rental cost or the sales price of a home to a certain percentage of the area median income. And then other types of government assisted, such as housing vouchers, Section 8 housing vouchers, that sort of thing. So once again, Danbury's supply. Danbury, as of the 2010 census, had just north of 31,000 housing units. And so a housing unit would be single-family home, an apartment, a townhouse, any discrete housing unit. And of that, currently, as we discussed, it's exactly 12% as of the latest inventory. And you can see the various types of categories of affordable housing that Danbury fits into, with government assisted and units comprising a good percentage of those. And government assisted, a lot of those are CHFA, USDA mortgages, and is one type. And then other types include housing authority properties that have government assistance and various funding to assist those units. And on the list, you can see Danbury is has the fifth highest percentage in the state it's one of the, not the fifth highest, but one of the highest in the states in terms of its percentage, particularly for a community its size. So Danbury being a mid-sized city in Connecticut, I forget, maybe the 10th largest or the 8th largest city in Connecticut, it has a relatively high share of affordable housing units for a community its size. All right, now where are a lot of those units located? They are clustered in a few different areas, and we are mapping or exact location of those units are somewhat limited in that we don't know where all the housing vouchers are, but of the deed restricted units in town, many of those are clustered in 3 locations, 14 units up at Stetson Place, 63 at Scopo Road, and 18 at Briar Ridge and Orchid Drive. And many of those housing developments look like any other in the city, so they might not be that notable. And so I think that's a really important consideration in piercing through a lot of the perceptions surrounding affordable housing, is that it really can look like any other housing in your community.
Can you clarify something? That looks like that's about 100 units, and you said there were like 3,700 or so units total.
Right.
But are the other units clustered near these units on the map here? Or, I mean, that seems like a pretty small portion of the 3,700.
Yeah, so of the units that qualify as affordable housing in Danbury, we only have the exact addresses for a small share of those. And we have, by example, we have a pretty good list of the deed restricted units. And of those, of the deed restricted units, they are clustered in, there's 3 big groupings is what we see. There are also a number of other locations in the city where you have deed restricted units, but they are clustered in these 3 locations. So we're putting this out there as an example. And what I think what we're interested in conveying with this is that you have affordable housing throughout the community, and these developments are examples of it where you have deed restricted units, and they're really part of the fabric of the city. And so affordable housing can be something that's really compatible with the existing development you have in the city. And it's often very benign. You don't even know that it's a deed restricted affordable housing unit. And so we want to provide you an example of some dense clusters in Danbury that you may or may not be familiar with, that are located in the city.
Yeah, can I just jump in for a second, Francisco? So Ari,
sure.
So we didn't map again the individual, Jen's individual tenant, where the tenants are located, nor the big properties like Palace View, like Ives Manor, the big governmentally assisted. We just kind of were looking at a map on the deed restricted units, because those are, again, for the point Francisco was making, they don't, it's not a big tower anywhere. These are just individual houses, or in a, like on Scuppel Road, part of a multifamily home. And of those.
So the point of this slide is that they're kind of spread out over the town and they kind of blend in, and it's not like.
Yeah, I mean, we couldn't map all of those, but I mean, I do, obviously we have a list because we know what the number is from the state, and we have the addresses. Well, we don't have our addresses for the tenant-based rental housing, like the RAP. or the Section 8 vouchers, which we wouldn't be mapping anyway. Nor do we, we don't need to do that for, and Jen knows where all those people are located in any case. But again, this was just on the 1/3 of the formula is the deed restricted. We just wanted to show you where they were in terms of developments. Okay.
Right. Thank you, Sharon. Okay. Now we talked a little bit about 830G, and 830J is actually the statute that requires us to do a plan. And this is a requirement that showed up on the radar about a year or so ago. And it's really the state is trying to further encourage towns and cities to be proactive about planning for affordable housing and do a better job of meeting or working towards meeting the 10% mandate. And so that's what's really compelling us to do the work here. And as acknowledged, the city of Danbury has needs that go beyond this mandate. So we are working towards the plan, and let me move on to the next slide. I can show you where we're at in this process. So that the state did produce a guidebook, and we're going to follow the guidebook because it's a pretty good example. There have been a number of plans already completed in Connecticut with various degrees of detail and robustness to them. So we're using this guidebook as the model, and that has a lot of constituent parts, and we are checking those off as we go, as you might say. Housing needs assessment, we've conducted much of that work, and Eric from RKG, who's on the call, his team has been involved in that work, and as well as the housing market assessment. And what we're working towards now, and including within this meeting, is starting to develop a values or vision statement that's going to help really identify what it is we want to achieve with the plan beyond just increasing the supply of affordable housing and maintaining above the 10% mark. And so we have an exercise a little later on where we're going to get into the beginnings of establishing the values and vision statement. And the land use and zoning assessment. So we'll work or walk you through that today and give you an idea of what we're looking at and how land use and zoning factors into an affordable housing plan. We'll take a kind of a high level view at it, but I'm hoping it'll be helpful for us in generating some discussion around the vision statement. Okay, so jumping right into that, let's talk about Danbury's land use. And first, let me talk a little bit about what a land use map is. And here's an example of Danbury's land use map identifying residential type land uses. A land use map is typically parcel based, meaning a property is put into a certain category of use. In this example, it's different residential categories. And the entire property is put into the category of its primary use. And so it could be commercial, industrial, and in this case, residential. So the map you're looking at on the right side of the screen are all the properties in Danbury that have some sort of residential function. Many of them are exclusively residential, and some of them might be more mixed in use, particularly in downtown Danbury. And what we see is in that lightest color yellow, and this corresponds with the colors in the pie chart, is that the city is largely dominated by one family land use and properties. And those are, concentrated in the northern part of the city, north of 84, and in the very southern part of the city. In the core of the city is where we see the biggest mixture of different types of residential uses, many of those associated with higher density uses as well. So some of the other types of land uses we have in addition to single family, which is the most common here, are single-family units with an accessory unit. And so that would be a single-family house with an accessory unit in the basement or at the back of the house or above the garage. And of which there are very few of those properties in Danbury. And we're going to talk a little later in the presentation about accessory units. Two-family units, of which there are more examples of, and most of those are clustered in and around the downtown, as well as 3 and 4 family units. Those are in blue. Townhouses, which you typically associate with a condo development, which are side-by-side single-family homes sharing common walls. Those are in the kind of the salmon color. Apartment buildings, these are more than 4 family type, more than 4 unit buildings. Mobile homes and dormitories, of course, associated with Western Connecticut. So those are your residential types. And what you see is all the areas in white are where you don't have housing. And there are various reasons for that. It usually begins with environmental constraints. Those are areas of water and wetlands and steep topography and grades and other various constraints, or industrial and commercial land uses where you don't have a mixture of residential because the industrial uses are not suitable for mixing residential with them, or the zoning does not allow it. So when we think about where the city might be able to accommodate more housing or affordable housing, we're dealing with a much smaller footprint than the city as a whole, than the 20+ square miles of the city as a whole. We're really talking about the areas that are allow for residential development because of the land supports it, or the zoning allows it. And so let's next get into zoning. And if anyone has any questions, if I'm not doing a good job describing anything here, feel free to speak up, and I'm happy to try to dig into it for you. So the zoning districts, as a reminder, zoning are basically the rules about what land can be and what a property can be used for in the city, and how dense the development can be on that property, and a bunch of other factors that affect how that land is used. And what we see is your zoning is really very similar to your land use, and that's what you would expect. You would expect the land use follows the zoning, and in some cases, in communities that are old enough, the zoning actually followed the land use, and that those land uses were there already. The zoning was instituted, and it created zones that matched the land use that was in place. And here too, we see that most of the city's single-family residential. Single-family residential is a fairly expensive type of housing to construct, and as a resident to maintain and to own. And so right away, that's a challenge to affordable housing. And however, being a city and not a small town, and many towns in Connecticut are almost exclusively single-family residential, you do have a mixture of zoning districts that allow for 2, 3 family, multifamily residential, mixed use. So the dark green areas are where you allow for 2, 3 family, multifamily. The city also has a residential office district, which is really, you can barely see it on the map, if at all, because it really only applies to a couple small properties out near the airport. So that's not a real big factor in this equation. And then finally, the other zoned areas where you have very little residential development within those districts, if any at all, include your commercial zones, which are shown in yellow, industrial zones, and the planned neighborhood development, where you do have a mixture of uses. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. Out in the western part of the city, surrounding the Summit property and some of the other developments around that area. And planned neighborhood developments are really designed for larger scale developments and mixture of land uses, both commercial and residential. So we see in the western corner of the city around the summit, a lot of residential units being planned and being constructed, along with associated commercial and office space too. Okay, and when we take a look at the numbers on that, 72% of the city is single family residential, and the multifamily around 7%, and that's all the different districts that we group together as multifamily. And industrial and commercial land at 11 and 8% respectively. And that planned neighborhood development area, well, it's a very large area, is only 2% of the areas of the city's zoning area. All right, I'll go through these one by one just to get you a little more familiar with the districts and what they allow. Because at some point in this process, we will need to make very specific recommendations about how it is that the city may be able to accommodate more affordable housing. And that might be tied to specific districts within the city. So taking a look at your single family districts, you actually have a few different types of districts. And those are based primarily on lot size. So the RA8 is an 8,000 square foot lot, which is a relatively small lot. It's a fraction of 8,000. It's about 1/5 of an acre, just a little under. Whereas an RA20 is 20,000 square foot lot at a little less than 1/2 an acre. RA40 just below an acre, and RA80 not quite 2 acres. And as you might imagine, the closer you are to downtown, the smaller you're in districts that require a smaller lot size, and the further south or north you are, you're up and getting into the RA40 and RA80 districts, which basically means if you're in the RA80, to build a house, you need a lot that is at least 80,000 square feet, and so that keeps residential density down. However, that's associated with higher homeowner cost because you have a much larger property, which has a higher tax burden. Generally, because of the density, you're probably beyond services such as sewer. You may be beyond city drinking water, so you have to provide and maintain your own services. So there can be more costly to build and maintain as a resident, and therefore potentially less affordable. Single family or multifamily homes are not allowed in any of the single family districts. While some of those properties may be grandfathered in, they were there before the zoning. New construction of multifamily homes in these districts is not allowed. So if we're looking to multifamily homes to provide additional affordable housing opportunities in Danbury, right away our geographic footprint of where that's possible is shrunk when you consider the fact that you can't build that type of development within any of these single family districts, unless the plan were to recommend some sort of zoning change to allow for that. These districts also allow associated uses such as churches, schools, parks, that sort of thing. And there are some uses that are allowed by special exception. Special exception is a type of permit that sets a pretty high bar. There's a high standard. There's typically a site plan requirement, a lot of information that needs to be provided by the applicant, a public hearing, notification. And so it's not just come in, get your permit and go build your home. And so there are a small number of special exception uses that are allowed in these areas. Cluster developments, however, and cluster developments are typically single family developments clustered on smaller lots that set aside some open space, are allowed by special exception in the RA 20, 40, and 80, as well as the RMF 10, which we'll get into the RMF 10 on the next slide. Any I just threw a lot at you. So any questions about single family residential zoning? Okay. Your multifamily residential zones. So being in the city of Danbury, I'm sure you're familiar with, and you see if you're going to downtown, plenty of multifamily development and older multifamily buildings. However, that's actually a very small footprint within the city's geography. And that is actually scattered quite a bit through the center of the city, along I-84 and a few other mostly state highways and arterial corridors. And the city has 3 different types of residential multifamily districts, 4, 6, and 10. And once again, that corresponds with lot size area. And there are these various other incentives that are caveats here. The asterisk on the RMF 4 and 6 shows that the zoning provides a housing incentive option, which allows for greater density in exchange for the development of affordable housing. And as I understand, it's a 1-for-1. Basically, if you build 1 unit of affordable housing, you get to build 1 more unit of market rate housing than the density would otherwise allow for. And there's also a housing redevelopment option that encourages the replacement of deteriorated 2, 3, and 3-family and multifamily housing, even if it is not in conformity with the zoning district that it is currently in. If that zoning district doesn't allow for that housing of that type in a new construction, you may rebuild. So there's not a disincentive to reinvest in those properties that aren't currently conforming with the existing zoning. So there are a lot of tools that are currently within the zoning that it could be we need to point to those tools in the affordable housing plan and say the city, needs to continue or maintain this within the zoning, or do a better job promoting this as an opportunity for developers or applicants. So there are some opportunities already within the city's zoning regulations. All right, very briefly, other zoning districts that allow for a mixture of uses, residential with commercial and institutional uses. The R3 is a 3-family residential district that allows for varying 1, 2, and 3-family residential units. The RH3 is a high-rise residential district. RR10 is waterfront residential district, and that is up at the south end of Candlewood Lake, that green that you see right along the shores there. And as I mentioned earlier, the RO, which are the couple of very, very tiny specks on the map south of 84 and west of Route 7. In addition to that, the city has within the zoning regulations something called a campus research park, which allows for a mixture of educational, business uses, and housing. However, there are no properties currently located in that district, which means the district has no geographic footprint, but presumably a developer could try to build development by requesting a zone change to that type of district. So the takeaway, I think, from this map is that a lot of these zones that allow for a greater variety of uses and may provide more opportunities for development of affordable housing in association with other market-based uses like ground floor retail are mostly located in the core of the city, in downtown and immediately east of the downtown. Okay. And finally, the planned neighborhood development zone. I talked a little bit about this already. To do a better job of explaining what this zone is, it's actually what's referred to as a floating zone, which means that a developer in another part of the city could request a zone change to this type of zone, presuming the requirements are met. They have enough property assembled, it's in the right place, that sort of thing. in which case the city could grant them a zone change. It's not compelled to, but could, to allow for mixed use development at a fairly higher intensity or density. And so what we see at the summit is moderately dense development, but more importantly, a mixture of uses. And that land development type looks a little bit different than what you might have in other parts of the city. Okay, any questions on the zoning before I discuss Connecticut Public Act 2129, which is a new set of statutes and requirements or mandates that the state is placing on cities that we should address through this process? And any questions on zoning? Okay. Either I'm doing a good job of explaining the relevance of zoning to you and this process, or you just want me to get it over with.
No, I think you're doing a great job. Thank you. Excellent.
And Ted would
Excellent.
know, Ted would know since he's the chairman of the zoning commission.
Oh, yeah. Really, though, you're explaining it. It's perfect for someone that's not familiar with the zoning or these areas. So it's really appreciated. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. And I promise you, you'll begin to appreciate how relevant zoning is as we start to develop some ideas and look to you to generate ideas and be a sounding board for some of the ideas that we develop in trying to figure out what's possible, because there may be zoning implications in all of those recommendations that may require a new district to be created, or changes to district boundaries, or new uses allowed in particular districts. So there are a lot of zoning implications here.
Francisco, can we learn anything about what other towns have done? I mean, I know Danbury's unique, but do we know like what's been done in other places? Were places successful in changing the zoning so that they could have more multifamily units in places that had been zoned for single family units, which are more expensive? Or what are the great success stories in Connecticut that we can draw from other people's experiences?
Thanks for that question, Ari. Those success stories are emergent in that a lot of communities this year and going into 2022 will be unveiling or debuting their affordable housing plans and presumably meaningfully getting behind the recommendations that are in those plans. So there might be some lag time before we see the number of affordable units increase in communities across the state, or developments to show up in response to changes that were made to the zoning or any various town or city policies. There have been some successes in Connecticut with communities that have been fairly proactive with respect to trying to achieve the state's 10% goal. Danbury notwithstanding. I think Danbury's taken this very seriously. We're working with the town of Berlin, and Eric and I are. The town of Berlin has gone from something like 2% affordable housing 20 years ago to around 9.5% right now, through a very intentional effort that involved incentives, changes to their zoning requirements, soliciting the development, and so there are some success stories there, and we're working with them to really codify that in their affordable housing plan. But it's basically been a policy of theirs to meet or exceed the state's 10% requirement. And there are a few other examples, and I think we will pull from other communities, and so and through this process to give you an idea of what some of your options are and what's worked in other cities and towns across the state. And in fact, a little later on this presentation, we reference a couple of other plans and their values or vision statements.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, Connecticut Public Act 2129. This Public Act is only a few months old. And it has all sorts of zoning implications. And really germane to our discussion would be the accessory dwelling unit provision of this act, which here it is in a nutshell. The state is basically saying to all towns and cities across the state, wherever you allow single family housing, you must allow an accessory dwelling unit. So you must allow someone to build an extra housing unit in their basement or above their garage or wherever, providing it meets building codes. Anywhere where single family housing is allowed by zoning, unless you opt out of the provision, and you basically have to explain why it is you're opting out. Many communities, I don't know if most, but many communities in Connecticut will opt out for various reasons. Some of the communities we are working with are choosing to opt out because they already allow accessory dwelling units. They already have zoning regulations that allow it. They have a mechanism in place. They feel it's well regulated, and they feel that they're accommodating the demand as it stands for accessory dwelling units. So many of the communities that are opting out are doing so because they would rather have more control over what's allowed and how it's allowed. Some communities are opting out because they don't want any accessory dwelling units within their community. Danbury had for several years, I believe, zoning enabling or allowing for accessory dwelling units. And there were some problems associated with that in some of the units where they were built and how they were used. And so it may be that we revisit the possibility of accessory dwelling units, and that may be a very important tool in our toolbox. But I think it's unlikely that you'll want to just kind of let this go and just comply with the state's with the Public Act in allowing accessory dwelling units anywhere where single family housing is allowed in the state. And we could take a very firm stance on that in the affordable housing plan. That can be one of the recommendations that we make as to how the city should handle this. And the city has until 2023 to opt out. So here, I'm not going to read through all of these. Some basic requirements or standards that the Act enables, and some more there. And the Connecticut Public Act 2129 is in response to some very real issues. There was a movement in Connecticut that got started a couple of years ago and is still active, called Desegregate Connecticut, that is working towards more equity and housing opportunity across the state. So this public act is in part a response to that movement and to some of the need across the state for more affordable housing. That being said, we have an opportunity here really to tailor something that's going to meet the specific needs of Danbury rather than the blanket requirement that this act would otherwise put into place. And it's by January 1st, 2023 that Danbury could potentially opt out of this act. So all that language is there, and if you're interested in digging into it some more, you can download the PDF, and the state has some more language online as well. Okay, any questions yet before we get into the values or vision statement piece of this?
Yes, I noticed on the last, if you can go back one step, I noticed that it's not required that it's affordable.
No, oh, thank you. That I missed making that point. It does not have to be affordable, meaning these units don't have to be deed restricted. for their rent, or they're not required to be a subsidized unit or any of those other requirements to get it built. It's just an accessory unit. And so that's a little problematic, because the general association here is, by virtue of the fact that it's an accessory apartment, it's providing more housing choice and presumably adding to housing supply, which is overall, in the big picture, is working towards improving housing choice and potentially housing affordability. But it's not a requirement that you're building an affordable unit to build an accessory apartment. And thank you for bringing that up.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
And also just the legislation requires that it be like as of right, so just a zoning permit. For a time in Danbury, it was an accessory use to a single family, and we had a bunch of stipulations. And then in 2005, it became accessory apartments and single family dwellings, again, subject to the 8 restrictions. Up until 2005, it was an accessory use, and then was moved to a special exception use, which is approval by the Planning Commission. And it had been that way from 2005 to 2015, when the whole accessory apartment section of the regulations were kind of, the regulations were amended to delete that section. So we really only had a handful of accessory apartments that were, that got special exception approval. I guess the 1.1% could have been prior to that, when they were just, by zoning permit. So right now there is no provision in the Danbury regulations for an accessory apartment, affordable or not.
And once again, there's not a requirement that they be affordable, and unless they are deed restricted somehow, and presumably because it would be as part of a single family unit, that would just be relevant or applicable to the rent, or subsidized in any other way, unless it meets another requirement of the state's affordable housing definition. It would not contribute to the city's affordable housing supply either, just by virtue of being an accessory apartment. So the advantage of the city, rather than just let this public act, become enforceable by January 1st, 2023, the advantage of opting out and developing your own, revisiting your zoning regulations and accessory dwelling units, is that you can create your own standards, and these can be permitted by, as Sharon mentioned, by special exception or exemption, and you can have a higher standard rather than someone coming in just for a zoning permit and being able to build something without their neighbors being notified or afforded a public hearing to talk about their concerns about it.
Francisco?
Yes.
Paul Rotello here. I noticed that it takes under statute a 2/3 vote to opt out. I'm wondering if
Yes.
well, maybe Sharon knows this, but I'm wondering if the statute speaks to 2/3 of members present or 2/3 of the body.
I don't know.
It's
Okay.
2/3. It's 2/3 of the body.
That's what I was, it's
Okay.
2/3 of the body.
And that's in
Right.
the statute?
Well, it doesn't say of the body, but it says 2/3 vote of the
Legislative body,
legislative
right.
Zoning
body.
commission and legislative body. Okay.
Yes, you
All right.
both have to opt out.
Presumably
correct.
both.
Yes.
That
If
could
you
be a-
recall, I came to you guys, the council and the zoning commission a couple of years ago. They had the temporary healthcare structures, which was kind of sort of a similar thing, but related to healthcare and healthcare providers. And we went to the zoning commission first, and then we came to council, and you guys opted out of that.
Yeah, so you guys are going to need 2/3 of your commission and 2/3 of the city council simultaneously to opt out. That's that's a pretty high bar. Okay, all right, thanks.
Right. You're absolutely right. And obviously by the state intends that to be a high bar. You're absolutely right, Paul.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we can get into my personal opinion about this legislation and requiring accessory units on, you know, well-kept single-family home zones shoved into front yards, backyards, whatever. And we can have that discussion, but the opt-out to actually clean that up and make it workable for Danbury, where we're already above the 10%, is that could be very extremely dependent on an election. We've got 16 months to do this, or I guess it's 14 months actually to do this. Yeah, well, something to think about. All right, thank you guys.
Yeah, again, this provision is effective on January 1st of 2022. So there's a year to opt out before you're subject to these meetings.
Yeah, 2023. Well, that, you know, so, you know, November, December, and then next year is 12 months. That's 14 months. Am I reading that correctly?
Well, from now, right? From,
Yeah, 14 months from now, correct.
Yeah.
But 1 year from the time the statute is in effect.
Correct. We've got 14 months to figure this out.
Yeah,
correct.
Exactly.
Right. And then a really fast meeting. Okay. Thanks.
And the advantage of bringing this up in discussion during our affordable housing plan process is that we have an opportunity to directly address it and come up with an alternative to this that will hopefully achieve some of the same goals, and to have that figured out by April of this year and afford you plenty of time to gain support for the recommendations of the plan as an alternative to letting this go through.
That's right.
Okay. All right. So we're going to shift gears a little bit in that I'm going to look to you, hopefully, to do a little more talking, and I'll do typing instead. And what we need to do, as I mentioned earlier, is we want to craft a vision statement specific to the affordable housing plan. We've developed one already for the POCD that's a working vision statement that, as you might imagine, really covers all aspects that a comprehensive plan should cover, you know, open space, environmental protection, city services, transportation, that sort of thing. But this needs to be very specific to housing and housing affordability. And it would help to provide kind of a framework for all the recommendations that might come out of the plan. And in that we'll make sure that the recommendations of the plan, whether it be goals or strategies, action items, are supportive of the vision or supported by the vision. And that's the value of the vision statement. And that usually starts with us just having a discussion about, you know, your community, what some of the strengths of housing are in the community, and where you see opportunities. So with that said, let me show you just a couple of examples from other towns and cities that have completed their plans. And Newington's is incredibly brief, but effective. It is seek to provide housing opportunities in Newington for all people. All right, so it suggests a plan that is looking beyond affordable housing, likely considering young adults and seniors and you know, everyone in the community. A little more robust, and with this one and from Weston, and the next one I'll show you from Farmington, they were really like a page long, which I think would benefit us to be a little more concise than that. So I pulled the section of it that really hit home with respect to housing and affordable housing. And so this is an excerpt from Weston's. So they talk about, they acknowledge the fact they plan on remaining a community of predominantly, and the word I would probably swap out with predominantly is almost exclusively with respect to Weston as it currently stands, but maybe that's not their vision. So their vision is predominantly single family homes on large lots. And the Planning and Zoning Commission recognizes the need to provide more variation in its housing stock Diversifying Weston's housing stock can potentially allow young people to live in the community where they grew up, allow seniors to downsize within the community, and provide housing opportunities to support a culture of inclusion and diversity. And so somewhere buried in that, and in some other parts that I didn't grab this excerpt from, would be really a focus on housing affordability. But they're kind of tiptoeing into that with this value or vision statement. And Farmington's. And Farmington is a lot further ahead than Weston with respect to hitting the state's 10% mark. I think they might be around 8%, and they're currently in a moratorium. The state does allow communities, it gives them a reprieve from the mandate. If they make a certain amount of progress, they can get a couple years off, so to speak, where they are not subject to affordable housing appeals. Farmington's in one of those periods. But this is an excerpt from their values or vision statement. Those terms are used kind of interchangeably, values or vision statement. And here they focus, however, on rental options, whereas Weston doesn't make a mention of that, various income levels. So they're hitting a little closer to the need for affordable housing and talking a little bit more about diversity of housing stock. So these are examples. And what I'd like to do now is to have you chime in about, let's start by talking about Danbury's strengths with respect to both housing and affordable housing and housing that is affordable. And I'll write down, whether it's just single words that jump to mind or sentences or passages. And what we'll do is we'll take that back over the next month, try to shape that into a draft vision statement we can present to you at the next meeting. And we'll keep working on it all the way up to the end. So with that said, I'm going to escape out of presentation mode so that I can take notes on the slide. And you tell me, what are Danbury's strengths with respect to housing and affordable housing?
Before we even do that, though, I'm just a little confused. When I think of vision, that's like going forward where we would like things to be.
Yeah.
It seems like the focus right now is on where we're at. So
Right.
Is that one step before we go to the vision?
Absolutely.
Or is that?
Yeah, we're like, so this is the foundation. You want a house, right? You don't want a foundation. You don't even, the foundation's in the ground. You don't really see it. You want the house.
Okay.
But we need to get that foundation in first. And so you have a foundation of housing in the city. And it likely is that you've got some strengths that we can build upon. And so let's start by talking about the strengths and what works well in Danbury, because maybe that'll carry us to where you want to be, where you would like to arrive at. And that's really the heart of the vision statement, is looking out. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, right.
Well, I think we have a widely varied housing market in Danbury with robust pricing. And by that, I mean the pricing is, mostly size dependent. The larger the structure, the more money it costs. Also, to some extent with rentals. So there's a pretty good range of prices for people considering purchasing in Danbury. I spent the afternoon today in the west side of Danbury, where those condominiums start at 700,000 or 800,000. But there are also condominiums in Danbury, multi-bedroom condominiums for far below that. And they're sprinkled throughout the city. I think that Danbury has a really good, we're talking about foundations, a really good foundation already. And, as indicated by the fact that the statute definition of affordable housing is already a major component of our housing stock at over 10%. So I think that you can, again, whether you can afford it or not is sort of up to one income, two income, children going to college and saving and things like that, and a general trend to renting as opposed to buying, which seems to make some sense for more and more people, or more sense to some people. But I think that Danbury, particularly in relation to other communities, is probably a little bit better along. And that's not even looking at the tax situation. We have a policy in Danbury of laying off taxes from personal property owners to commercial, industrial, and retail structures, which diffuses and reduces the tax burden for single-family homeowners and also for apartment renters. And that's a cost that needs to be included too, because the cost of home ownership is not just buying the house and paying for the mortgage, insurance, and taxes and things like that. So I think that Danbury, in terms of its place in Western Connecticut, and certainly its place in Fairfield County, is a leader in affordable housing already, and I think that's a strong position to be in. Are we where we want to be? Probably not, but we're probably farther along. We're certainly farther along than most of the other adjacent communities, and that's no disrespect to them. They have different models, but one of our models in Danbury is allowing things that may not be allowed in adjacent communities, and that shows up in some of our prices and opportunities. And we're also really big, just in terms of square miles, at 44, one of the largest city towns in Connecticut, and that gives us some options as well. Thanks.
I would just also chime in. Oh, yeah.
Add
Sorry,
my
go ahead.
comments verbally. Perry here.
Sorry.
While we might not have enough of certain types of housing, like Paul said, we do have a diversity and variety of housing types. And like Farmington, we also have a diversity in neighborhood character types.
Yeah, thanks. I just want to make sure we all heard it. I would just chime in. We also have partnerships in addressing housing needs that are fabulous here. Aries organizations being one of them. Developers like Bob's on the line, wanting to provide additional housing and understanding, tenant needs, as well as others, for sure. I'm not singling out him. I'm just, it is an example. It's community groups and organization and/or active partners.
Okay.
I think, yeah, go ahead.
I think first thing that comes to mind to me is we not only have a varied housing market, we have so many options of housing, but it's not just, you just don't find, as you touched on earlier, affordable housing or expensive housing in one particular area. It's just sprinkled throughout Danbury. So you can find a variety of housing in a variety of areas of Danbury, and Danbury being big, that's important too, because it is sprinkled throughout. Yeah, we have pockets of 2-acre zone parcels in one particular section or so, but there's all types of housing in all types of areas. It's not just like a district of this group is just parked over here. The other thing that we talked about earlier too is to become one of the components of affordable housing, for example, is the CHFA financing, which, by the way, I wanted to ask you if I could, Mr. Gomes, does VA also, is that also a part of the calculation of an affordable housing, VA financing, or is it just CHFA?
Eric, could you chime in on that? I'm not sure, Ted.
All right, I guess the point I'm trying to make is, we need government also to get involved on a certain part of the housing, and that's the affordability of it on the monthly payment, not just on the purchase price end, where we're looking to try and figure out how we can get purchase prices affordable, or what we could do with zoning to add units or increase units. But the monthly payment on the financing aspect of it, or some type of government assistance on those programs, also helps. So you got the CHFA financing that's all throughout Danbury. If you took a map of Danbury and got from the Connecticut Housing Finance Authority, all of the properties that are financed in that fashion, you'll see that it touches every street in Danbury.
Right.
Come on.
I mean, am I saying that? Am I making any sense on that?
Yep, yep. Okay. Any other strengths of housing and affordable housing in Danbury?
I think I would just add that the growing population reflects that not only do we have a lot to offer, but it is attractive to people to move here. I'm not sure how that's going to find its way into a vision statement, but it is an
Yeah.
attractive place to be.
Okay.
And do we have anything in there about access to recreational activities like the lake and parks and stuff like that? We have large land area, but
Yeah.
specifically
So I
like
would
the-
say access to services and resources is probably a strength of the housing, that, you know, the housing's not out in the middle of nowhere where it doesn't have good access to open space. or
services and
city
resources, but I was thinking more in terms of parks and recreation. I mean, I would
Okay.
put both down. There's access to both.
I mean, we also have a good, you know, a job market here. So, you can live where you work.
Yeah.
Good economic base, jobs, right?
Yeah, the PND district is work, live, play.
Right,
Don't even
Right.
have to own a car.
Right.
right. That's the vision.
All you need is a movie theater.
Oh, come on.
Oh, I hear you, Bob. If you're trying to talk, I can
Yeah,
hear
we
you.
hear
I
ya.
can hear you.
If you want to chime in, you have our attention.
Okay. Well, I'll be honest, I can't agree with some of these because I think what I see holds forth for a certain population in Danbury, maybe above the median income for the area
Okay.
and all, but a lot of these things mentioned are not really inclusive of those maybe below the median income that we have in Danbury. I think when we looked at the stats that we gave in the previous meeting, we saw the problems people have in meeting
Yep.
the rents and all the 30, whether it's 30% and so forth. I think this is all true. And even meeting the state's definition. But the thing is, there are people, once you hit under the median income, I don't even know if the state's definition of affordable housing
Sure.
really
You're right.
means much to somebody below the median income. But I'm sure that you'll turn to what I'm talking about afterwards. I mean,
Yeah,
if I'm above the median income, everything we have here probably is true. Okay, but the
Right.
thing is, it's our biggest need is for those below the median income who can't meet the requirements for maybe a financing through Chfa, or if they are having can you live in Danbury and meet the affordable housing if you make $15 an hour? I'm going to ask this
Right.
question. We're working
Yeah.
towards $15 an hour, but can you get affordable
Yeah.
housing for you with just making $15 an hour? I mean, so what I'm saying is I agree with a part for, like I say, that this all applies mainly to me. I see those above the median income of the area. Okay, so, but, and it's all positive, but,
Can I raise my hand? This is Bob Patello.
Need is in the direction I'm pointing to, I think.
All right, Bob. Yeah, Bob, go ahead. Go ahead.
I'd like to interject and just, I wasn't able to listen because I didn't know how to get back online, but there are a couple of thoughts I'd like to go over with everyone and say hello to everyone once more. But my thought is that the biggest question we're going to be asking is is the general sentiment as to where we're going to grow and how we're going to grow and what are we going to be when we grow up? Do we want to be a Norwalk, a Stanford? Are we happy where we are? That's one consideration. And the other thing is that this about the accessory dwelling units. Well, we all know that didn't work last time we had it, and because of the fact that 80% of the people took advantage of it, and it wasn't just for in-law apartments, they made them illegal apartments as well. So it became a real problem, a real headache for zoning and for the rest of the communities. But I think that the two issues that I'd love to have everyone think about is that we need to look at the downtown areas that are already zoned, that we could maybe redo the zones, make them so that they are more conducive to higher activities and higher usage. That's one consideration. Or, there's this one magic number that Sharon has control of and the zoning commission has control of that changed the lives of all us builders. And that was the overall lot width. And years ago, we had a certain lot width, and then when they changed it by 6 feet. It made like 80% of the houses couldn't be expanded. So now you have to look at that. That is a magic number to look at. And so, but once you open that gate, you have to find out by opening that number, say from like a 2-family in an R3 zone from 75 feet down to 65 feet overall width, what's that going to do and how many places potentially can you see opening up in the city? And whether, like I said, you have to be able to control the gate, but that overall width number is the control. Now, Sharon can verify that and tell you that number is very, very important. And that's why people can't go to ZBA, because ZBA will never approve an overall width exclaimer and, be able to overdo and override that.
Right. So I think between your comment and some of Robert's comments is probably would be worthwhile for us to move ahead to the next slide and try to capture some of that, because in this part of the discussion, I'm really looking to you folks to identify what the needs are with respect to housing and affordable housing and enabling the development of more affordable housing.
Before we do, though, just one more thing for the last slide. We talked about diversity of housing options, but I don't think we talked about ethnic and racial and religious diversity, which is attractive to many people. Danbury has it. Not every town in Connecticut does. I think that is something that would fit in among our strengths.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we just heard some needs. So there are, to Robert's prior point about the housing stock that you do have, and even the housing that may qualify as state affordable, there's likely still some outstanding need because of poverty or really low wages, low household incomes in Danbury, that your housing stock may still struggle to accommodate those residents. So there are housing needs for very low income.
Well, the question comes in again, do you want to work with the RMF zones or do you want to work with the R3 zones? And if you pick the zones you want to work with, then find out how you can reinvent these zones and let more units per zone, per acre, or per square foot.
Right. So
those are the magic numbers that you can play with, but you want to be careful that you don't open floodgates.
Right.
We have the situation like we had like 10 years ago where it was happening up in Hospital Avenue, where everybody was building these 3-family houses in the back of a single-family house.
Right.
And that's when they decided that this is out of control, and they had to change the mandate. So by changing that one number, it changed everything. And Dennis Alpern was very smart. When whoever advised him to do it, it was right on the mark, because that number means a lot.
And you're talking about what number specifically are you talking about?
The overall lot width.
Yeah, the lot width.
In every zone, it's going to tell you what is the minimum overall lot width. Yeah. And what they did is just by changing that number, a lot of these lots that were like 75 and 80 feet now needed 100 feet or 125 feet.
Right.
And once
Right.
you change that number, there was a lot of units that were cut down immediately.
Yeah.
Now you have to say, do you want to reinstate some of that, change that, massage that number so that maybe some of these people can come back and say,
Okay.
I can get another 2 or 3 units out of it. But it's got to, Sharon's going to have to see by changing those numbers what's going to happen with the floodgates when people start coming in for applications. Because then once one does it, they can all do it.
And that's often referred to as frontage requirement. Lot
Yes,
width.
exactly.
Yeah, so it's width at the front yard setback. So
Right.
it's 20
Yeah.
feet back, the width of the lot, what it needs to be.
Right.
Yeah, and if you really want to see just a glaring example of that in practice, just take a left or a right off of Lake Avenue onto Merrimack and Concord, and you will see these houses that were built by the dozens up there that are sideways because they didn't have the frontage, but Danbury allowed them to be built sideways. So the front door, which would normally be on the side of the house, or the
Right.
front of the house, is now on the side of the house. And often you have garage facing frontage. So the aesthetic image from the neighborhood, people driving through and even living there, is just a bunch of garage. They almost look like warehouses. And I think the Mayor Boughton put a moratorium on sideways houses. That Sharon can jump in on that. But yeah, I mean that's Bob's right about that. I mean, width and frontage is a huge component to this
Right.
about where houses are allowed and where they're not allowed.
And what's there, what the stock is there, and how you can increase size and capacity. But that, like I said, it's going to have to take. You have to decide how big you want Danbury to go, and don't forget that when you're in downtown areas, that when you open up to bigger lots or more apartments, then what are we going to do about the school issues and police and fire and all the services we have to give? So it's
Yeah,
something
it
we
all
have to
ties
consider.
together. I mean, it's like the old downtown lots were really narrow and they were really, really deep, main streets and streets like that. And you start carrying that over to residential houses, you get a very different look and you get much, much higher density. And with higher density and more bedrooms comes kids, and with that
Right.
comes schools.
We're
and
dealing with issues now that we can't
it's all
handle, so we have to-
synergistic. Yeah,
we have
it
to
all
look at it.
ties together. And
Well,
basically,
it's a great problem to have that people want to move to Danbury, but on the other side of it is that we as the people in Danbury have to decide what we want this to be as it grows up. And do we want it to be another Norwalk or Stanford, or do we want to keep it about the size that it is? That's the important question.
and how much the taxpayers subsidize all of that,
Right,
because
exactly.
it's coming out of their pockets.
So when they do that general referendum or general questionnaire, I'm going to be very interested to see what the overall public sees as to what they want to see Danbury be. And I think after that guidance, then we can really look into it and start looking at the neighborhoods that we could rebuild and put incentives in. And we can look at properties that could be increased in size as far as number of units. But it's all going to be by looking at the regulations.
Okay.
Do you
Thank
concur with that, Sharon?
Oh, yeah, I agree. And I think some of the questions that we're formulating for the survey will help,
Yeah.
at least on this issue of housing,
Right.
get to that. But yeah, it's from a regulatory standpoint, and Paul was right. I mean, there was a moratorium. Can't even remember what year it was. I think it was 2005, somewhere around that. And it really had to do with all these sideways houses. I mean, Merrimack, there's some off of Whitlock down on the streets off of Deer Hill the same way. And so there was a whole row of townhouses that, with the side of the building facing the street with, barely any windows where a front door would be. So there were some design guidelines instituted, and I'm sure the lot width was adjusted to address those things.
Well, we know how we failed in the past. Now, looking forward, we can see how we can do it, and do it with a good foresight.
Okay.
One thing that I keep thinking about here is,
All right.
Oh, yeah, no, you can go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead. Yep.
I just keep thinking about that slide that we saw before that sort of reflected that the affordable housing that we have in Danbury right now is kind of spread out in a variety of different places throughout the town. There was another slide from the first meeting that we had a while back that showed that a lot of the people in need of affordable housing are our Latino population. And if we're looking to expand affordable housing, I think it would be important to make sure that it's not all in one place, that we're not just like, ghettoizing one community, but that it continues to be spread out across the town as it is right now.
Okay. Any other very obvious needs with respect to housing, affordable housing, maybe a particular housing type that you think is underrepresented in the city that could be a good solution to provide more affordable housing, or a population that you feel is underserved by affordable housing or housing choice?
Yeah, I would say we've spent the last 2 generations concentrating on high density condominiums, and we have, for the most part, avoided dedicated apartment buildings. The closest we came to that was Dan Bertram's proposal for Kennedy Flats, which was, I think, a group of 6 or 7 110-foot high apartment buildings, and Danbury just doesn't have those. And I think if Danbury needs to continue to grow, if it needs, and I think Danbury needs to continue to grow, I think that you're in pretty tough shape when your city's static or shrinking. At some point, we're going to have to bite the bullet and start building actual apartment buildings, and we all know what they look like. I mean, it may be a little bit hard for me to define them, but we know them when we see them. And we just don't, outside of a handful, we just don't have them in Danbury. And there has always been, I've had conversations with Dennis about this 20 years ago, there has always been resistance to that. And that's unfortunate to me, because I think they really provide a lot of housing solutions. Density breeds a lot of things, and one of the things that it breeds can be tension and anxiety, but it doesn't have to be that way. And they can also breed a lot of cultural and spiritual explosions. A lot of great things can happen in apartment buildings, and we've just never really taken that seriously. I think ultimately the city has to go in that direction. Maybe not in my lifetime. I mean, but it's got to go there. To me, anyway, it does. Some of the
consideration I think has to do with if we did in fact get the train, that's going to be a big part of making a transit-oriented district, which would be downtown and around the train station. I mean, that would be the most logical place to try to build and go high.
Right, and you're thinking about Packweoke maybe doing something down there across the street from the train station, reevaluating that neighborhood. That might be a place to start, something like that. But I think it's got to be looked at.
I would agree, Paul. We've been trying to revitalize the downtown for 30 years, and it just needs residents. It needs people on the street.
Yeah.
It may be a somewhat separate conversation about from affordability, but I think just increasing the stock in general, as we've talked about, will help in that regard as well. So I think it is something very necessary for the health of the downtown. Thanks.
And Paul, I'm not sure if you're still online there, but would you consider Kennedy Flats to be an example of this kind of higher density, larger scale apartment buildings, or is that still kind of the light version of that?
Yeah, I mean, that aesthetically and even practically, it really isn't. I'm looking at more like the towers on either side of Price Right, buildings like that. That's not my aesthetic vision for apartments in a city like Danbury, but the structures themselves. Excuse me, I gotta mute. This is constant. Like that, like the hold on one second, please. Sorry about that. Okay. Brick, stone, high, maybe parking interior, maybe non-contiguous parking, elevators, things like that. Kennedy Flats is an interesting sort of hybrid, but no, that would be a step in the direction, but it's not the destination.
Okay.
Okay. Hello?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay. I was just talking, the question on Kennedy Flats, that was something that applies to what I said before, that who was Kennedy Flats certainly provided housing for large numbers of people, but again, who could afford the rents that were in Kennedy Flats? I honestly believe, from just my experience of knowing some of the people that have had problems in housing in Danbury, that it's really if it's scattered housing, it has to be something like it could be. I'll be honest with you. I would like to see some revision allowing single homes to allow an apartment and so forth, because I think that's one way to get a more scattered population around town, and also not to have a large concentration of people that may be of lower income, as its housing needs for very low income. I would just say housing needs. My point originally was housing needs for people below the median income.
Okay.
Might be addressed. It's not that, doesn't have to be very low. It includes the very low, but even people above that.
Is everyone familiar with Samuel's Court? I didn't hear that mentioned in any of previous conversations, and that's something that the people that are looking at Danbury, it's one of the complexes that was for low-income housing, and yet they did a great job. They're in a great location, and it's working. It's been up for about 8 or 10 years. And I actually drove by there the other day just so I could see what it would look like 10 years later. And it's still in excellent repair. It's got a great reputation, and it's servicing that market. And so that might be a model for something in the future. But Samuel's Court is one of the places we should be looking at.
Okay, good point.
Okay. And that's Samuel's Court?
Yes. Sharon, can you give them a little background of Samuel's Court?
Geez, yeah, I'm not sure which one that is off the top of my head. Is that on Scuppel
Those are the
Road?
ones on
Yes,
Scuppel?
exactly.
Yeah, they're on the
Scuppel
list.
Road.
Those are all on the list. Yeah.
Oh, those Scuppel Road.
They used to be the Renaissance, right?
But they're listed as low-income housing, and they basically have helped the people with lesser incomes. But if you drive by there, and everyone should, the place is gorgeous. It's been well kept. I don't know exactly how many units they have, but it's definitely, I think, a model that we should be looking at to help that segment of the population.
Yeah, I think of that. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, Sharon. This is Denise. But isn't Bob? Correct me if I'm wrong. But isn't Samuel's Court also that it's also subsidized housing for those that are mentally ill as well?
Yes. I think
Okay.
we need to find out more about them. I remember when they first came on board, everyone was going to give them a hard time, but I wanted to see what it looked like 10 years later. And 10 years later, I drove in there, and I'm impressed. So I think we all, as being on this committee, should do the same thing, and because that's one segment of the market we have to take care of, the low income. And so if we can come up with complexes like that and use them as a model, let's find out what they did, how they did it, and we have it right in our area. It's something we should have on the table.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. I have some other ideas, but let's bring them on another time.
All right, yeah, we can come back to them.
Okay, all right.
Anything else with respect to need? A need for a particular housing type. We talked about, higher density, larger scale apartment buildings, potentially a need there.
Do we think we have adequate enough of senior housing now?
I was just going to bring that up as well.
Yeah.
Across, young adults and seniors as well. So.
What's
so
the
let's
supply
talk-
of senior housing
No.
now?
Yeah, I think we need more senior housing.
And you're talking about 55 and above?
I'm talking about at least 62 and above.
Hey, come
Because
on.
of so many, not really, but think about it though, Bob. I'm just thinking about the number of people that are retiring
Right.
and can no longer afford where they are. They basically have ended up doubling up with family members, and they just can't afford to maintain their homes anymore. So yeah,
Well,
so
we definitely we owe it to them as being good citizens, and making their livelihood in Danbury and then having to have to move because they can't afford it. So we really owe it to them to be able to do something. So I agree with that.
Oh yeah, no
100%.
doubt. Right, no doubt. No ifs, ands, or buts about it.
But again, don't you think there's a difference between senior housing? You need to qualify affordable senior housing, because there's age restricted senior housing that is luxury. And
Yeah.
that's not what, I don't think what you're speaking about. You're
Right,
talking about,
especially,
No.
right, definitely not.
The seniors that can afford it, they'll go to Lake Place, they'll go to wherever, if they can afford it. They don't need special housing, but we need to be able to take care of the people, the working people that all of a sudden they don't have enough money from Social Security to stay in their houses.
Right, exactly.
And that's becoming a bigger and bigger issue, especially as time goes on and inflation has been getting worse and worse.
And as Sharon alluded to, it's a problem mirrored with young people as well, if we want to keep them here.
I agree. So, but what restraints we put, and basically how are we going to do it so that we can build? You, as a builder, you need to be able to build up buildings and be like the $100 to $125 a square foot. Then you can get reasonable rents as long as you're paying about $40,000 to $50,000 per unit for land cost, and your cost of building is $100 to $125 a square foot. We can make the numbers work. But right now, because of the inflation in both labor and materials, you're talking like $200 to $225 a square foot, and that's why right now I'm not building.
Right.
Because the numbers just don't work.
That's another challenge right now, and I think that the lower the density it is, the higher the cost of construction is, and the less financially viable it is. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, well, it's all about math. I mean, you just have to make sure the numbers work, and right now they don't. That's why you're not seeing a run for multifamilies be bought when these people are selling their 4-family houses for now $500,000, $600,000, and $700,000. That's insane.
so it's a density and height, as to Paul's point, you get density and height, right? So, I mean, those are the things that we look at from a regulatory standpoint, and lot width, but for the numbers to work, you need more density. And how to get more density, unless you have a lot of land, you have to go up. And so it's a formula.
But also,
so over 3 stories, you have to have an elevator.
Right.
Also, while you're on the subject of density and height and costs of materials, the cost of land is ridiculous. So is this a place to insert the concept of why doesn't the state and why doesn't the city donate what they have as far as land stock to a developer partnership? I mean, if the state, if up in Hartford, they're jamming this down to 149 or 159 communities or whatever we have in the state of Connecticut, why doesn't the state get involved? There's so much state-owned land property. I mean, look at the prison. I mean, they can't take a chunk of the prison that fronts Route 37 and back to the community for a high-density affordable housing project. There's state-owned property all over.
That's a good question, Teddy. But right now, there's an option for some builder, but the city is putting that little, was it on Liberty, on the corner of Liberty, right across from the skating rink, that they want someone to come in and do apartments and I don't know what they call it. It's a referendum or whatever, but they want the builders or the developers to come down and talk to them. I don't know if anyone has.
No, I know that. I think they tried before without success, but that's a small project. I'm talking about a project where you can build, a couple towers. I really don't think this is the environment where we're going to go and build single family detached or condos or ownership, I should say, with the deed restrictions in there. I think to get affordable housing immediately is going to be on a rental basis. And how do you do that to get, rentals for the low and the lower income? You have to have density. You have to build up. And if you can take the lot cost and completely remove it from the equation, that's a huge part of the process, right, Bobby?
Oh, for sure.
So everybody's
right. You need to go higher. Like I know personally that Joe DeSilva is looking at making high rises behind the Palace Theater, and behind St. Peter's.
Yep.
If you want to embrace him and say, okay, Joe, well, you can go to 10 floors, but make sure you have adequate parking. I mean, how many units can you put right in those two locations?
And another thing that's interesting too, and I'm off by a couple dollars, but try and catch my concept. A senior citizen that's a widower or a widow that is collecting Social Security is right about at $15 an hour. So the person that's just starting to get a brand new job at $15 an hour, just starting out in life, you're looking at seniors and single seniors that their Social Security is about $15 an hour if you look at it, and they need that housing too.
Right. No, we have to look at all of the geometrics on this to find out where we need to be and what our population is, to find out who our people, what our people are, what can they afford, and then let's zero in and backblade into what we need to do, and say, okay, this is what we need, this is the use, and how can we make it happen? And one area that I'd like everyone to talk about and think about is that just north of North Street, that whole area, I don't know what you would call it, that's where the old Castro convertible warehouse was, and they have a little park there now. But that is a forgotten area. I think that would be a great area to put incentives in, and just drive down there and see how many houses, if you put an incentive, you could see that they could be taken down and brought to a better location, and brought the location up and brought more housing in there. And that is one area of growth that I think that we've neglected, and no one thinks about it because you drive by there a million times a day, but you never think about that whole section of town. So
Bob, are you talking about Rowan Street where the old Arnold
Yes.
McLaughlin's hat factory was?
Yes, exactly. And when you drive down there, you see that there certainly is potential. We could look at doing some thoughts about zoning and incentives to be able to take some of those buildings and redo it. And you have the land there. And so if you give them a program, they will come.
When we talk about senior housing, so we talked about affordable, age restricted. Is there also need for more assisted living type housing in Danbury?
Well, my dream is to one day to build one-bedroom units that have an accessory bedroom behind it, so that it would be actually a one-bedroom unit with just in the back, you just have a restroom, a bathroom, and a small room, so you could have an aide, because there's so many people, so many of our seniors are going to need a place to live. They won't be able to afford a two-bedroom, but they could have a one-bedroom with an accessory, and that's what they would need for a couple or a single, and then have their aide staying with them. Because, friends, we're not going to have enough room for all of the people that are going to be going to retire, and there's not enough room in retirement homes for us. So what are we going to do in 20 years? And if we're doing something for the future, what are we going to look like in 20 years when we don't have enough housing stock to take care of the people, the older people that need accessory living, or they need to be on ground floors or whatever? We just don't have it. So if we want to think outside the box, right now we should be thinking about now and later, and that's 10, 15 years from now, because it's coming.
Okay.
Any comments on that, or that's actually, if you look out in the Midwest, they have a lot of that. It's called the
multi-generational housing.
Yeah, multi-generational housing, exactly. And that's.
I think it's a great idea. I think it's something we need.
And and you can, and Sharon's concerned about them turning them into multifamily houses, but I know we could think about putting restraints in there so it wouldn't be feasible to make it a multifamily. So if you had a townhouse and you had 3 floors, you could have the lower floor that has just a large room with a ADA bathroom, and then that the elderly couple could be downstairs, and then you have 2 floors where the family's living, and that's all in one. And you would never be able to separate it to make it a 2-family, but just to be able to make it so that you have a unit with a full kitchen and then a half kitchen, and you'd be restricting the use, and it would be something for the future. And then they'll take care of 2 sets. They'll take care of the young 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds that can't afford to get out from mom and dad, but want to have some independence, and also your elderly when they come back to you and you have no place to put them. So I think that's something we should look at, and that would be I would love to be able to help you design that. I think that's something for the future, and it's working out in the Midwest now, and there's a couple big companies like Lanier that are doing it, and they're doing like side-by-sides, and then they're verticals, and they're selling like hotcakes.
Hmm.
So it's something we could consider.
Okay.
Can I throw something crazy out onto the floor here?
Yeah, Ted, go ahead.
Well, I'll throw this into Sharon's direction, and I don't want it to be any problem or third rail, but do we sometimes, as it relates to zoning and regulation and concepts and ideas, are we fearful of being creative because we have the possibility of enforcement issues and we maybe need a double or a triple the size of our zoning enforcement? Is that something that's something that's holding us back?
I would say that nothing really holding us back from being creative, because I'm always looking, as you know, to be creative.
Yeah.
But there's an administrative function aspect of something new, and how are we going to handle that?
Yeah.
And it's some. I really wouldn't say it hand ties us for the most part, but we do have, we have to consider it.
Yeah.
We do have to consider it. If the accessory apartment was a problem, as we all know, and that's why we decided as a city that it just wasn't working the way it was designed, and that did have enforcement issues, and we had enforcement actions, and it still is problematic. So, but I don't think it should tie our hands. We have to figure out how to meet what our needs, and then how to administer it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
And so everybody just knows, we have really 1.5 zoning enforcement officers for a city this size, soon to be 30-something thousand housing units. Forget everything else. We're at 31,154 10 years ago. We're going to be at 32 or 33,000 with the new census. That's a lot of units.
Okay. Well, I have to excuse myself because I have to go to another meeting, but I appreciate being online with everyone today. The next
Thanks,
time I
Bob.
promise I'll be on Zoom. Just wasn't able
No
to get
worries.
early
Thank
enough
you
to
for
get it set up.
participating. Thank you.
Oh,
Thank you,
my
Bob.
pleasure.
Take care.
Thanks, Bobby.
I'll be well. Okay, thank you. Bye.
You too.
Francisco, I think you probably have a good sufficient base to start crafting a vision statement. So it's 4:45. Let's see if we can get through the last couple of slides and see if there's any final comments for this round. Oh, you're muted. Hold on, guys.
Sorry. As part of this process, we will be conducting a public meeting. And given where we're at, we recommend that conducting that public meeting no later than February of 2022. And it may be that it's in our favor to wait till then, or at the very least second half of January, because we can make a little more progress towards establishing kind of the framework of the plan, and then figure out what are the questions we really want to ask the public and what kind of input we really need from them. In addition to that, and I'll get to this in a moment, we plan on doing an online survey. We want to launch that first that will give us a real strong sense for what the public's concerns are, what their ideas are, and we could explore those further in a public meeting or workshop. So our time frame right now is second half of January or February, and we just want to put that out there with you. And if you have ideas otherwise, very receptive to hearing your thoughts on the best time to conduct that. And we do want to wrap up the plan by April, and so we want to conduct this outreach early enough that it can meaningfully provide some input to the plan, and we could respond according to what we hear at a public meeting. It's not our intention that this would just be a presentation to the public of our plan, but it would be early enough in the process that the public can participate and give us some feedback on some of the preliminary recommendations of the plan.
I just have a quick
Uh-huh.
comment about the
Yeah, go ahead,
online
Karen.
survey. Is there going to be any other, is it going to be only online? When we talk about being inclusive
Go
with
ahead.
all of our residents, I just want to ensure that we have any other options besides for online, if we have other ways to make sure we communicate so we can include our senior population that we need, and also maybe English as a second language.
Yes.
Yes, very important.
So you seem okay with our kind of public meeting time frame. So let's jump right into the online survey. We've gotten started with the draft of that. As I mentioned, we'll review it with you in more detail at the next meeting. It's intended to be a fairly brief survey. Currently, and I hope you've all seen, or at the very least have participated, more so have participated in the POCD survey, which is currently online. And if you have not yet participated in that survey, please go to danburypocd.com. We have a link there. That survey covers some of the ground that we would cover in this survey, but we take a much deeper dive into housing issues and housing affordability with this survey. And more importantly, we don't want the two surveys to get confused. So we don't want people thinking, oh, I already took that survey, I think. So our intention is we will see through the POCD survey and wrap it up at some point, likely in November. And then kind of go quiet for a little while with the surveys, and then launch this survey maybe in the very beginning of January, and as late as that. That way we can we don't confuse the two. Now, with respect to making the survey accessible,
Okay. All right.
the current POCD survey is available in obviously in English, but also in Spanish and Portuguese. We have translated versions online. And we can also make that available in the form of a PDF that can be printed and filled out manually. And so, Kara, if that's something that would be helpful for you to have, I can get you a PDF of that for the POCD. And then what we do is we collect those once we've closed out the survey period, and our staff go back in and basically enter those in manually into the online survey so that everything's being captured together, and we could measure all the statistics together. So
Okay, great.
we can do the same. We plan on doing the same for the housing survey, and that we'll translate that as well into both Spanish and Portuguese, and we can make that available in a hard copy to you.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Our next steps, we're going to put together a summary memorandum of all of our market research and a lot of the material we reviewed at this meeting and the last meeting, and that will kind of be the baseline for our plan that we'll build upon. And later on, we'll release the online survey after making a draft version available to you for review. And then we want to get that public meeting scheduled, figure out what format we're going to conduct it in, and pick a date and get it scheduled so that we have enough time to promote that. And then the most important part of this is actually to start populating or developing further the housing needs discussion that we had, and identifying some potential opportunities and putting those in front of you at the next meeting so we can start to build a list of potential solutions and opportunities for inclusion in the plan. All right. Our next meeting is Monday, November 15th, also at 3 o'clock. So it's 4 weeks from now. And prior to that meeting as well, we'll share the agenda with you so you have a better sense for exactly what it is we'll be covering. But we'll definitely follow up on the survey, on a draft vision statement, and make some more work towards identifying potential ideas and affordable housing solutions. All right, any questions?
Thank you so much, Francisco.
Okay, that,
Thank you,
sure.
Francisco.
Yeah, so
That
that
was very
concludes my
helpful.
presentation. I'll turn it over to
Thank
Karen.
you.
Thanks. Okay, yeah, again, great discussion. I appreciate all the background work Francisco and his team have done. We understand there's a bunch of zoning implications, so it's a process. You just gotta, we gotta go through it and understand what the implications of making changes are, and see what goals we need to try to meet. Keeping an eye on the affordability of all this, because that's the point. And I agree, and I have to just say, I do agree with Bob Tabersack that, you know, there is a segment of the population that we really need to address, that not going to get caught up on, you know, and the state's appeals list. There's another group that we have to ensure that we're considering all the alternatives to provide to provide housing for them as well. And with that, if no one has any other comments, I guess I'll take a motion to adjourn, and we'll see you next month. I'll see many of you
So
in the
moved.
interim.
Second.
Okay, made by Paul, I
Okay.
think, and seconded by Bob Tabersack. Thanks so much. I appreciate everybody's input. Very good
Yes,
discussion.
thank you.
Thanks,
Yeah,
everyone.
thank you.
Good to see
Great
you.
meeting.
Thank you. Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good
Good night. Thank you.